All right, hello and welcome, guys, to. Uh, I guess this isn't exactly Hacker Public Radio, but I'm doing this as a tutorial or using a tutorial from Hacker Public Radio. So over on HPR, show 4177 by Deltaray, we're going to go ahead and play that and follow along using Blender. Alright, we're on another desktop screen. I already have Blender installed, so let's before we do that, let's do this. Okay. So that way you can see what keys I'm pressing to do stuff. There we are. Very good. We're on Pop OS, by the way. Okay, so I listened, to a little bit of the tutorial, and what he said is we should try general, and yep, like he said, there's a cube right there, so we can see that cube, and we're going to hit F12 because that's supposed to render something. Can I move anything? Alright, so yeah, there's the cube, just like he said, and I don't know how to not do this anymore. So I should have probably listened a little bit further. Bring you back when I learn how. Oh wait, there's next up there. What's that? Yeah, I don't, okay, so according to the tutorial so far, we should just be able to close this. This is a separate window, so I'm just gonna first check first. Yeah, it does appear to be a separate window. Let's, there we are. So yeah. Tutorial's going well so far. One of the things I want to mention before we continue is I'm using an older version of Blender than what the tutorial is using. So in the tutorial, Deltaray is using 4 that he downloaded from the website, the tarball. I'm using from my package manager, which is like version 3 something. So I also wanted to point that out. Things may look a little bit different here, but so far it's working. So this is the camera, apparently, this triangle thing, pyramid and triangle, and it's aimed at that box. And that's what we were seeing when we pressed F12. Hotkeys, very good information. I love using hotkeys. One of the things that happens, he talks us through render. This is the one he's talking about, render. And those are the hotkeys under render. I clicked on rendering. So yeah, just pointing that out. You might end up doing the same thing and seeing something different at first. So let's go back to layout. There we are. All right, let's go ahead and play the tutorial along with us. So that way, because I listened up ahead and then I realized it would probably better to have this going at the same time because we're going to want to click on stuff and show you as he's talking as well.
And you're kind of making the keyboard an extension of your hands. And Blender works very much that way. The more experienced Blender users tend to use all the hotkeys instead of using all the menu options, because by doing so, you're able to move very quickly and actually create a scene very quickly. So it's good to get in the habit of using these different hotkeys. So F12 is one that I already told you about. And then next to the main menu where it ends with help, you'll start to see some tabs starting with layout and ending with scripting. And these are basically different layouts for the window to basically put your workspaces in different modes. So layout is the default one. If you click on modeling, it'll kind of change the window layout and it'll change what the cube looks like. Now it has some dots around it in the what's called the 3D viewport. That's like the main area that you're working in. You'll notice that the dots are now around the cube. That means it's in what's called edit mode, and you can see that indicator not just in the 3D viewport but also in the upper left hand corner. You see that there's now another space where it says edit mode. We'll skip that for now and keep going, but if you click on sculpting, the Blender has the ability to make kind of organic sculpts and kind of like working with some clay and doing stuff with clay. That's a bit more advanced, so we're going to skip that for now. UV editing, this is where whenever you want to apply like an image to an object to make it so that, like you want to put a logo on an object, or maybe wrap a face around an object if you want to make something look like a realistic human face, you might come into here to do that kind of stuff. Texture paint, this is very similar to UV editing, where you're basically like, painting a texture on top of, kind of like if you were using GIMP, you would, after you add a texture image to your object and set it up in the shader, you could actually paint on top of that image and do different things with it. Shading, this is where you apply different color and texture attributes to the actual model to make it look realistic, or to make it look like something, instead of just a plain, gray color. We'll get into that later in this tutorial. Animation, this lays out the windows so that you can animate your scene. If you press the space bar right now while in this tab, you'll notice that it actually starts moving the timeline scrubber over in real time of 24 frames per second. This is basically showing how the animation would work. Press the space bar again to stop the animation, and you can go down to the bottom and click on that blue line like in the number area, and just basically move it back to 1 or 0. That way you're back at frame 1. And then rendering, I don't usually use this tab very much, but I guess it's for if you're doing finishing touches on a render. Usually I guess it depends on whether you want to have the render window pop up or have it show up in this tab or something like that. Usually I just have it pop up. Compositing, this is like post-processing area for doing extra things after the render happens. Like, for instance, if you want to add a fog glow, or chop up the image, or add some sparkle or something like that. That's what the compositing steps are for. That's what compositing is all about. Then the next tab is geometry nodes. We're not going to get into this in this tutorial, but this is a very powerful system that has been added to Blender to help with creating, like automating the process of modeling complex things. You could dedicate pretty much a whole podcast to just geometry nodes, or actually any of these aspects of Blender, but geometry nodes especially. It's a relatively new thing, and there's a lot of tutorials that are popping up out there, some of which are older and are based on older information, so you kind of have to be careful what you're following, see which version the tutorials is made for before following along with it. And then scripting, Blender has a Python engine built into it, or at least a Python interface built into it, and you can actually write code right in Blender and have it do stuff. Like if you wanted to duplicate an object in an array and make it follow some mathematical algorithm, you could do stuff like that. So basically the sky's the limit. If you click on the layout tab again all the way back on the left, then I'll talk about other parts of the overall Blender window. So the 3D view.
I just want to stop real quick here and tell you how much I enjoy this so far. I know I haven't been saying much, so you can just kind of see as we're listening, but that's what I like. This is kind of like learning in the terminal, listening to an audio while following along on your screen is so wonderful. In the terminal, you don't have a UI that would change per version, so you would, say, be distracted by the new look. Same thing with the audio. When he's just like, click on the button over there or the tab here. If I were following a video, and because I'm on version 3, the video may be showing version 4, there would be slight differences in the UI that would distract me. This way, I'm not distracted. I'm just kind of listening and following along. This is great.
That's the part with the cube in it, and over on the left hand side you'll see a toolbar with a few options going up the left hand side. This is for if you want to change between select box and cursor. Cursor is, if you look in the 3D viewport, you'll see in the center of the screen like this red and white circle with a crosshairs. That's the cursor. It's basically wherever the cursor is at in the 3D viewport is where it's going to add an object. You can also use the cursor for like rotating around the cursor, like more advanced modeling and animation techniques can use the cursor. We're not going to get into that now. You also have the operations for move below that with the arrows pointing off in all directions, and rotate and scale and transform, which is basically like moving the object around the scene and so on. Annotate, measure, and and then add primitive. We'll get into those later. I'm mostly going to have you use the hotkeys because I think you'll find, especially in the Hacker Public Radio community, you'll probably appreciate being able to use the hotkeys. If you look over to the right-hand side of the window, at the top, you'll see where it says Scene and View Layer. We're not going to talk about that in this tutorial, but if you look below that, this is called the outliner, where it says Scene Collection and then has a hierarchy of objects and stuff. So if you click on like camera, you'll see that it actually highlights the camera in the scene. And click on cube, it'll highlight the cube, and click on light, it'll highlight the light. So this is just basically, it gives you an overview of the different objects in a scene. Once you get to have more complex scenes, this is very useful to go through and check on. The other thing that you'll see here is that much like you'd have visible layers or something like that in a paint program, the iris logo and the camera logo that's next to each of the objects, like off to the right, those actually control whether you can see something in the viewport or see it in the render. So like for instance, if you click on cube and then you click on the iris logo, you'll see that it goes away in the viewport. But if you hit F12 now, it'll still show up in the render. And so this is useful if you're trying to declutter your scene in the viewport, but you still want stuff to show up in the render. You can turn things on or off. Go ahead and close the render window if you hit the F12 button. And
so
you
what
can
he's talking about is that
recheck the iris icon that's next to the cube icon. The same is true for if you click on the camera icon and disable like the cube and the camera in the render window. So if you disable that camera next to the cube and you hit F12, nothing will show up, right? You don't see a cube or anything like that. So go ahead and close the render window again, and you can recheck the camera icon next to the cube. But this is how you can control things, as far as visibility goes. There's other ways of doing it, but this is like for keeping yourself organized.
That I did not see. Did he click on this one? And then, that's the disable renders, the camera, not the actual eye. So now if we, okay, so it's still rendering. Let's try it now. Oh, there we go. Okay. So, okay. I thought if we did the camera one, it would disable the render, but I guess not. Maybe if we do it like that. Oh no, it still does it. Okay. Okay. That works. But I do understand this layout though. I use GIMP, so I kind of understand how this works.
If you look below that, you'll see like a rather detailed window with a whole bunch of icons and a toolbar and stuff like that on the left-hand side of it, with some colorful icons, and then on the right-hand side, a bunch of text and, different input areas and stuff. I guess the first thing I should probably mention about 3D applications, because all 3D applications are victim of this. Doing 3D is hard. There's lots of attributes that you have to adjust and settings that you have to adjust to set up a scene and to model things. And so that's reflected in the sophistication, the complexity of the interfaces. People like to criticize Blender for having a complicated interface, but honestly, all of the 3D, more advanced 3D application and modeling software out there has a very complex interface that you have to learn. There's a learning curve to it. And so, it's kind of unfair to judge Blender like that, but I guess if you're paying $2,000 for something like Maya, you don't want to think that it's complicated, right? You just want to learn how to use it to get your money's worth. So maybe Blender gets the raw end of the stick there for being free. Anyways, we're not going to get into this too much yet, but just know that those icons on the left-hand side of this function window, what's this called? Properties window. I guess it's called the properties window. Has many different functions. Like if you see the camera, then that lets you set render settings. If you click on the like printer-like icon below that, that shows you the output settings, like what kind of resolution you're going to have. And then we're going to skip over a few here and go down to where you see like right above the wrench icon, the blue wrench icon, there's an icon that when you highlight over it, it's orange and it says object. And if you click on that, you'll see it takes us back to the default view that we were in for this object, for the cube. There's settings for, where the object's located, how it's rotated, and so on. The other thing that we're going to care about today is if you go down near the bottom of the icons on the left-hand side of the properties window, then you'll see a checkerboard. You'll see a checkerboard basically, and then above that you'll see kind of a smaller checkerboard wrapped around a ball. That's the materials window. And if you click on that, this is where you actually set up what an object is going to look like. Like not its geometry, but its texture. You should see like where it says material, and then below that you'll see base color, and it'll be white. Like this actually controls what the basic color of this object is going to be. And so if you click on base color, and then a color selector will come up, you can just move around.
Okay, that we don't have. Okay, let's look for a materials window in here. Hopefully, okay, so we went and grabbed Blender 4.1.2 LTS from the website. This'll work, general. And I believe we were over here, we were looking for some sort of mesh materials. There we are. Oh, wait, so was that not in the other one? We're going to keep going with the old version. Yeah, we're going to keep going with the old version. This is kind of an experiment on my behalf. Whew. So this is what we're supposed to be looking for. I could have just read that. I don't know why I didn't read it. The explanation of it, I was looking for an actual circle with patterns on it. And this is that, but my imagination just gave me something completely different to be looking for.
Inside the color selector and choose a color. Like let's say we'll make it red. Just drag the circle in the center of that color selector down to red. And then you can click back where it says base color, and it'll make the color selector go away. You could also hit escape, and it'll keep your selection.
Let's back up just a touch.
Where you see like right above the wrench icon, the blue wrench icon, there's an icon that when you highlight over it, it's orange and it says object. And if you click on that, you'll see it takes us back to the default.
Crisis averted.
This object for the cube. There's settings for where the object's located, how it's rotated, and so on. The other thing that we're going to care about today is if you go down near the bottom of the icons on the left-hand side of the properties window, then you'll see a checkerboard. You'll see a checkerboard basically, and then above that you'll see kind of a smaller checkerboard wrapped around a ball. That's the materials window. And if you click on that, this is where you actually set up what an object is going to look like. Like not its geometry, but its texture. You should see like where it says material, and then below that you'll see base color, and it'll be white. Like this actually controls what the basic color of this object is going to be. And so if you click on base color, and then a color selector will come up, you can just move around inside the color selector and choose a color. Like, let's say we'll make it red. Just drag the circle in the center of that color selector down to red. And then you can click back where it says base color, and it'll make the color selector go away. You could also hit escape, and it'll, keep your selection. I'm sorry, if you hit escape, it won't keep your selection, but basically just move out of the color selector window, and it'll keep your selection. So now we've set the base color to red, but we don't actually see any changes, right, in the 3D viewport. It still looks like it's gray. Well, that's because by default it puts you into a mode called just the viewport shading mode, where it's basically just showing you the basic geometry of objects, and it's not trying to render them or represent what the textures of them look like. And this is controlled by some icons that are up. If you look in the 3D viewport with like the grid and stuff of the scene, if you look up in the upper right hand corner of that, you'll see 3 circles like in a horizontal line that are kind of outside of that window, and one will be highlighted by default that's all filled in. And this is basically where you select the different types of viewport shading. So if you click on the one next to it that looks like a wireframe, like the one to the left of that, all the way to the left, it'll change the viewport shading mode so that things just show up in wireframes. So like the cube now just has like a wireframe outline of the object. Go back to the one to the right of that, and you'll have the shaded mode basically just showing solid view. To the to the right of that, you'll have what's called material preview, and this basically uses your video card to create a quick kind of game-like rendering of your scene. When you click on that, you should see the cube change to the color red or whatever color you chose. And then the one next to that, all the way to the right, is actually the rendered mode. So you don't have to leave it on this all the time, but one of the features of Blender is that it can do real-time rendering of the viewport as you're moving around. So, you're in the scene and you can see the stuff. If you go to move around the cube and stuff like that, it's going to re-render the scene kind of in real time as you move through it. Okay, go ahead and click back to the filled-in circle or the solid view up in that set of 4 icons for controlling the view, because I don't want to slow down your computer too much while you're doing this. Otherwise, if you're in rendered mode, it might be kind of slow for you. We'll get to changing that in a bit.
Okay, this is awesome. This is awesome. I found something in Blender earlier when I was just poking around. Where is it? That's not it. Goodness, where is it? Oh, there it is, system info. So when you click this, it'll have you save your system info. And I saved mine to the downloads. So let's go take a look at what's in that. I have went to downloads, yeah. So let's go here really quickly. Let's do a C600 first, because I like to have proper permissions there. And then we can do a little bit of that. Oh, I thought this was going to, oh, don't do that. Come on now. We just open this puppy up real quick, so that way you can get an idea of what the system resources are. It's not showing my GPU in here, but I do have.
So now what we're going to do is we're going to take this cube and kind of smush it so that it becomes the floor of our scene. And the way you do that is you'd scale the cube. So press the letter S for scale. And then if you move your mouse around, you should see that the cube gets bigger and smaller and you can kind of control it by just moving your mouse back and forth. What I want you to do is restrict the scaling so it's not happening on all axes, but it's only happening along the X and Y axes. So to restrict it to just the X and Y, we're going to basically turn off the Z axes, and to do that we'll press Shift Z, and now when you move the mouse around, you're going to see that it basically keeps it kind of in the same height, but you can make it bigger along the X and Y axes. And go ahead and just scale it up a bit, until it kind of fills up a lot of the scene, maybe not all of it. And then click your left mouse button if you're using a right-handed mouse, and that'll keep the settings. Now we want to scale it along the Z axis to make it like shorter so it's not as thick. So hit S again, and then press Z without pressing Shift, and that should scale it so you can make it thinner, and you basically bring the mouse cursor in towards the cursor or in towards the center of the object until it's kind of thin, and then click the mouse button to accept the change. The next thing we'll do here is move down the floor a little bit so that the next object we put in isn't covered up by the cube here. So to transform this down, you press the G key for grab, and then and if you move around your cursor, you'll notice that it just kind of moves it everywhere, and basically you're moving it in relationship to the viewport and how you're looking at. But we want to restrict the movement so it's only up and down. So the way we do that is press Z on the keyboard, and now we're only restricting the movement to the Z axis. So move it down until it's just below the grid itself, the display grid, so that you can kind of see the grid above the floor that we created here. And go ahead and click the mouse button to accept the change. And now we're going to add a new object. If you press Shift and A, capital A for add, you'll see an add menu come up basically where the mouse cursor is, and you'll have a bunch of options for the different types of objects that you can add to the scene. Go down and select text, and you should see basically right next to where the cursor is, the word text will show up as actual text, and this is an object. To modify the text, we'll press the Tab key to go into edit mode, and basically this works like text in a word processor or something. Hit the backspace key a few times to erase the word text, and then type in the capital letters HPR, and then when you're done, press Tab again to go out of edit mode. And so now we have a text object that's called HPR. We're going to now rotate that so it's perpendicular to the floor. So you can press R for rotate. And we want to rotate it, like if you move your mouse around, you'll see it kind of rotates it right along the screen and stuff like that. But we don't want it to be like that. So we'll press X to restrict it to just rotating around the X-axis. And now if you see, you have this rotation where it's actually going around the X-axis. But we want to perfectly align it 90 degrees. So one thing that you can do is just type in an angle, and so I can just type in 90 and then hit enter, and it'll rotate the object 90 degrees along the X-axis, so you can get a precise rotation. Well, if you render the scene right now with F12, you'll see that you probably just have an HPR text that's on top of a red cube, and that's maybe kind of boring. So, but it shows, what you've done so far. So go ahead and close this render window, and over on the right-hand side where you had the properties window for, all the different settings, you'll see that if you have a text object selected, that there's an icon above the materials button that just looks like the green letter A, And if you click on that, that's how you affect change to a text object. And what we're going to do here is we're going to extrude out that text object so that it has some depth to it. And so look for the drop-down section that says Geometry and click on that. And you'll see that there's an option that says Extrude and it says 0M. And Blender has its own units that are, I guess, based on meters, but really it's just kind of arbitrary because you're just working, this isn't really a CAD program with like proper units of measurement and everything, at least not in the sense that a CAD user would expect. So, I mean, you can think of M as being meters, but really it's just kind of arbitrary. But it's Blender units, basically. So if you go down and you basically click and hold down that extrude setting, then you can move your mouse, and you'll notice that when you do this, it actually makes, if you move it to the right, the value increases, and if you look over at the viewport, you should see your HPR text actually getting thicker. And so make it, not too thick, make it maybe like 0.2 M, which is, 0.2 for the setting for the extrude. And we also want to make it look kind of, a little bit fancier. So underneath where it says bevel, there's another section under geometry that says bevel, and it says round, object, and profile. Where it says depth, click on the value for depth where it says 0M and do the same thing. Scroll it to the right until maybe it's just like 0.04 just to kind of round out the edges of the extrusion so it's like a little bit nicer.
I was not expecting that.
You're probably thinking, well, I can't really see the HPR logo very well or something. What you can do is move around the scene in the viewport by using your middle mouse button to basically click in that window and move around, and you should be able to like rotate around in the scene. Now, you're not moving the camera, you're basically moving where you're viewing the scene from in the viewport. And so we'll get to moving the camera later, but you can, set this up so you can see a little bit better. If you want to zoom in, you can use your mouse wheel to actually zoom in on the scene and zoom out just by, mouse wheel up and mouse wheel down. Now, if you're not comfortable with using the mouse button for moving around, you can also use the axes icon that's in the upper right hand corner of the viewport window. You'll see like this colorful axes X, Y, and Z, and if you click in that area just with your left mouse button and hold down and then move, it'll also move around your view. There's also these icons below that, like there's the magnifying glass with the plus. If you click on that and hold down, you can zoom in and zoom out of your scene. So this allows us to see what we're doing a little bit better. But you should have, a simple HPR logo, and you can press F12 to render again to see how that's changed in the viewport. It's not looking great because, the light isn't in a good place and so on. So what we're going to do now is close this render window again, and in the outliner, maybe click on the word light to control your lighting area. And basically what we're going to do is move this light to be in front of the HPR logo so it lights it up. So if you press G while you have your light selected, and then you can just move it down. Basically, you don't have to move it along any axis. You can just kind of move it down, and you'll see visually how it's in front of the HPR logo, and then click the left mouse button to accept the movement. And now if you render, you'll see, okay, this is starting to look a little bit better. It's starting to be the HPR. Whoa. You can make out the letters at least better. So go ahead and click on Close on the render window. And we want to make it so that the HPR logo itself is a little bit nicer to look at. It's not just boring text. So click on the HPR text object, and now we're going to go over to the material settings. Basically, over in the right-hand side where I said there's that checkerboard icon, and right above it there's that that round ball with the checkerboard on it, that's the material settings. So here you should see, you come in here and there's no material set up. So you can click on new to create a material and maybe rename it by clicking in the spot where it says material.001.
1 second.
And just change.
Okay, let's start
So
again.
click on the HPR text object. And now we're going to go over to the material settings. Basically over in the right hand side where I said there's that checkerboard icon, and right above it there's that round ball with the checkerboard on it. That's the material settings. So here you should see, you come in here and there's no material set up. So you can click on new to create a material and maybe rename it by clicking in the spot where it says material.001 and just change this to, like, say HPR or color logo or something. We'll call it HPR. And instead of just setting like a color here, I'm going to show you how you can do some cooler things with Blender using the shader tab. So if you go up to the top of the Blender window and click on the shading tab, it'll take you over to a different view where it shows, like, your icons over on or your file system over on the left hand side and stuff like that. Mostly you can ignore the stuff off to the left for now and just focus on the viewport window and what's called the nodes window below that. And the nodes window is pretty cool because it's actually the shader editor window, but I mean, what these are nodes, and it acts like a pipeline or like a factory or something like that. If you always like the ability of Unix command line processes to, like, pipe the input of one thing into another, I think you'll really like this, and it can be a lot of fun to, like, set up pipelines of nodes to do different things. So you should have a node that says principled BSDF, and this is basically kind of like your basic material properties. Like if you come in here and click on the base color and change it to blue, let's change it to blue, then you should see that the logo in the 3D viewport has changed to blue. Well, that's nice, but you could do that in the properties window. So what we'll do is we'll make it so that instead of it being just one color, we're going to make it so that each of the letters is a different color. And the way we're going to do that is by setting up a node called a color ramp and a gradient node. So we'll first add the color ramp node.
1 second, I have got to put my reading glasses on because I'm trying to see down there, and woo. All right, so the reading glasses are on. I am, okay. So I'm trying to find where he's talking about. I see the principal BSDF. I'll rewind to show just a little bit, because I just couldn't see to make it out. So let's try again.
What we'll do is we'll make it so that instead of it being just one color, we're going to make it so that each of the letters is a different color. And the way we're going to do that is by setting up a node called a color ramp and a gradient node. So we'll first add the color ramp node, and you can just basically put your mouse in the nodes area, like the shader editor window with the nodes, and also press Shift A for add. And this will bring up a menu of different things that you can add, divide into categories. So go down to Converter and then scroll up to where it says Color Ramp.
Oh boy.
And it'll basically give you a color ramp that you can move around and put in place to the left of the principled BSDF node. If you happen to accidentally click on the window before you moved your color ramp down, you can select the different nodes by clicking on their title area or some blank part of the node, and it'll select it like it would an object, and then press G and move the node around. This is another good reason to be able to learn Blender's different hotkeys, because they get used everywhere, And so it's useful to actually learn how to use the hotkeys so that when you're going around, you can do stuff a lot faster. Okay, so what you'll see is the color ramp next to the principled BSDF node. You'll see these little circles at the edges of the nodes that say like color, alpha, base color, and stuff, and they have different colors to them. Basically, you can connect these by, for instance, clicking on the color, and do this. Go ahead and do this now. If you click on the color circle and hold down your mouse, and you should see a little line come out, like curved, you can connect it up to one of the different circles on the principled BSDF node. In this case, you want to hook it up to base color. And that basically is taking the output of the color ramp node and putting it into the base color. But you don't really see anything happen. And the reason why is because there's other nodes that we have to set up to make it, to transition the color in the way that we're intending it to. I mean, like anything else on a computer, the computer does exactly what you tell it to. And sometimes you make assumptions that you're telling it enough, but really you're not. So now that we've connected those, you can press Shift-A again to bring up the search window. But this time, instead of going through the menus, I want to show you another way of using this add menu. If you click on search and just click on it, it should change the menu to like a search thing. And you can type in what you want. So we're going to say type in gradient, which is GRADIENT, and you'll see it shows you the option for texture, gradient texture. Go ahead and click on that. And then now move this gradient texture to the left of the color ramp. Again, if you accidentally clicked it in the wrong place and you want to move it, you can just select the node, press G, and move it around. And so take the factor output, the FAC, from the gradient texture and connect it up with the factor input on the color ramp. So again, there's two options. There's for the output of the gradient texture. The outputs are on the right-hand side. The inputs are on the left-hand side. So you connect FAC on the gradient texture with FAC on the color ramp. And now you should start to see changes happening on your model. And if you've ever worked with gradients, like in GIMP or something like that, there's a concept called color stops. And in the color ramp window, in the color ramp node, in the shader editor, you should see there's like a black color stop and a white color stop. These kind of look like pencils, like the end of a pencil. And you can actually click on one of those color stops and drag it like left and right and change where the color stop starts and stops. This basically is to control, where a color starts and stops. If you select one of these little color stop indicators, it'll change the color that shows up below that, like in below where it says POS and above FAC, and you can actually click on that and select what color you want it to be. So let's change the one that's on the right side, the rightmost color stop. Let's change that to blue. And then click on the black color stop, and we'll change that to red. So in the color selector, since black is going to be all the way down, you're going to have to do...
Hold on.
I'm sorry, I should have done this for white too. So I need to remember what I need to tell you. So
something's not going right.
To select blue, basically in the color selector, you need to turn the saturation level all the way to the top. And so the color selector has...
I missed something. I don't know what I missed. Let's just go back.
And in the color ramp window, in the color ramp node, in the shader editor, you should see there's like a black color stop and a white color stop. These kind of look like pencils, like the end of a pencil. And you can actually click on one of those color stops and drag it like left and right and change where the color stop starts and stops. This basically is to control, where a color starts and stops.
Oh,
if
okay, there it
you
is.
select one of these little color stop indicators, it'll change the color that shows up below that, like in below where it says POS and above FAC, and you can actually click on that and select what color you want it to be. So let's change the one that's on the right side, the rightmost color stop. Let's change that to blue, and then click on the black color stop, and we'll change that to red. So in the color selector, since black is going to be all the way down, you're going to have to do I'm sorry, I should have done this for white too, so I need to remember what I need to tell you. So to select blue, basically in the color selector, you need to turn the saturation level all the way to the top. And so the color selector has like the wheel, like the wheel thing, and that also has a slider on the right which controls the value. So basically when it's all the way at the top, that means like you're going to have full color. When it's all the way down at the bottom, you're just going to have blackness. This is the way that you control the lightness or the darkness of a color. And then the hue is controlled by moving around that circular area. Okay, so when you click on black, you're going to need to turn the value all the way up to the top or close to it, and then in the hue, select red. And so now we have kind of this interesting, transition from red to blue happening in the letters. But let's say we want to make it so that each letter is independently its own color without actually doing something with the model itself. We just want to do this in the color ramp. So if you click on the red color stop, the one all the way to the left, and then above it click on the plus there, that'll add another color stop that's in between that color stop and the next one. So that one will probably show up as purple, but if you click on that color stop and then change its color to green, like, change the hue to green, then you should have, kind of a rainbow-like effect. But let's say we want it to be individual colors. So right now it's doing this linear transition mode where it's actually making a gradient that goes between the color stops. Let's make it so that it's constant. So if you click on the drop down that says linear, and this is called the interpolation, change it to constant. And now you should see there's like a hard change between red and green and blue, but the blue doesn't really show up much because it's all the way to the right. So bring the blue color stop to the left a bit until it actually covers up the R but none of the P, and then do the same thing with green. Make it so that it goes to the left more so it colors up, covers up all of the P but not the H, and so on. So now you should have 3 independent colors for each of the letters in HPR. All right,
mine didn't
great.
do that.
Press F12. We can render, see how it looks. Okay.
I got constant.
Starting to look cool. Okay, so now let's make the scene a little bit more interesting. Well, let's do another aspect of textures. So bring the blue color stop to the left a bit until making a gradient that goes between the color stops. Let's make it so that it's constant. So if you click on the drop down that says linear, and this is called the interpolation, change it to constant. And now you should see there's like a hard change between red and green and blue, but the blue doesn't really show up much because it's all the way to the right. So bring the blue color stop to the left a bit until it actually covers up the R but none of the P, and then do the same thing with green. Make it so that it goes to the left more so it colors up, covers up all of the P but not the H, and so on. So now you should have 3 independent colors for each of the letters in HPR.
Yes,
all right,
something's not right.
Press F12. We can render, see how it looks.
Yeah, I don't think I missed anything. I think that there is definitely a section.
Um,
Let's just keep going.
Okay, Starting to look cool. Okay, so now let's make the scene a little bit more interesting. Well, actually, let's do another aspect of textures, and we're basically going to add some micro displacement or bump mapping to the texture. Basically, if you think about geometry of an object, you have the macro geometry, and this is the way I think of it. You have the macro geometry, like the big changes, the big form of it and stuff like that. But then you also have micro geometry, which is like, cracks and bumps on a model and stuff like that are so small that it doesn't make sense to model them. But you can use like the shader editor to make those effects. So if you click somewhere in the shader editor and then press Control A and then click on search, and we're going to type in bump.
Oh, hold on. I did something I can't
say
get
vector
rid of.
bump, and we'll select that and then put that.
All right. So I went back and I listened to everything all over again. I'm sure I didn't miss anything in the tutorial so far. I'm thinking he's got a setting that he has applied that he did not mention. Maybe because he works with Blender regularly, it's something that's automatically applied that he doesn't know about. Mine just isn't showing, so we're just going to continue.
Okay, so now let's make the scene a little bit more interesting. Well, actually, let's do another aspect of textures, and we're basically going to add some micro displacement or bump mapping to the texture. Basically, if you think about geometry of an object, you have the macro geometry, and this is the way I think of it. You have the macro geometry, like the big changes, the big form of it and stuff like that. But then you also have micro geometry, which is like, cracks and bumps on a model and stuff like that are so small that it doesn't make sense to model them. But you can use like the shader editor to make those effects. So if you click somewhere in the shader editor and then press Control A and then click on search, and we're going to type in bump. That should say vector bump, and we'll select that and then put that below the color ramp.
Hold on.
And then press.
Something is not right. We're in this. All right, ladies and gentlemen. I have the Blender documentation. They have ebook files. I downloaded the HTML and the EPUB. Went ahead and unzipped it. Did a run a search for vector bump under there, and it shows me that it is in the nodes tool. However, he misspoke when he said Control A. It's actually Shift A. Easy thing to, I'm not criticizing. It's just I'm a very literal person, especially when I'm learning. I'm over here mashing Control A in all of the different windows, trying to figure out why am I not getting this search window. But it's Shift A. He just misspoke there. Yeah, so now we got the vector bump there, and it works just like how he said, aside from the thing there. Whoops. So you just do your Shift A and you type in bump, and it'll pop right up in there. So I'm still in the old Blender now. I do have the new Blender also open as well, so you can see this is the new one. But I had to open this up just to make sure there was no difference between. And also, I still couldn't figure out how he did his linear thing there. Yeah, that one's still at a loss for me. I'll figure it out later, but we're gonna close this one now because I do not want to corrupt this file by editing the same file with two different don't save two different blenders at the same time. We don't want to do that. Let's take a look at our system monitor real quick just to make sure we're not ramping up things too much. I know we're pretty good. So yeah, I'm gonna unpause in just a second here. Alrighty.
Put that below the color ramp.
Oh, wait.
And then press Control A again, and we're searching. Well, in this case, instead of search, we're going to move down to texture, the texture menu, and you'll see in the submenu of texture, there's several different types of textures, where we're going to select the Voronoi texture, which is like a, it's named after the person who came up with it. So click on Voronoi, and this will bring up a pretty big window with a lot of different settings, or a pretty big node with a lot of different settings. Connect the bump normal output with the normal input on the principled BSDF node. And
I'm trying to get to it.
Connect the distance output of the Voronoi texture with the height input on the bump node. And if you wait a few minutes, you should see this will really drastically change the
Wait, distance will, I mean, the bump with what now? Okay. Bump normal to, where is normal on the other one at? There is a normal somewhere. Oh, there it is, right down there. Okay. Boop, there we go. Whoa. Okay. There it is, huh? Let's take a little look there. That's going to look interesting, right? Let's zoom in on that just a little bit so we can kind of see a bit more. All right, zoom out on that a little bit. I still don't know how to get the individual letter thing. We will continue to use our documentation and try to figure out where the breakdown in the tutorial occurred for us. Again, I'm a very literal person, especially in the learning environment. So a misspeak, I'm guilty of it 100%. So no accusations being leveled here. Let me go ahead and save my work. Always got to save your work. And by the way, I think this will also allow me to show mouse clicks in here, right? Oh, yep, there we are. And very good. Let's keep going.
SDF node. And then connect the distance output of the Voronoi texture with the height input on the bump node. And if you wait a few minutes, you should see this will really drastically change the look of the logo. I mean, you could leave it at this if you want, but let's make it a little bit less intense by turning the strength in the bump node down. So you just click on that strength setting and you hold down the mouse and move it over, probably to about 0.1. And then if you zoom in on the HPR logo so you can actually see it, then go over to the Voronoi scale and increase that so that it's probably about 60 or 70 or so. It's kind of odd, but increasing the scale makes the bumps smaller. So it's a little bit counterintuitive there. The other thing I'd like you to do is change the Euclid.
I know he said change the scale, but what number?
So it's a little bit 60 or 70 or so. It's kind of odd, but increasing the scale makes the bumps smaller.
Wait, he said 60 or 70?
It's a little bit counterintuitive there.
Mine has a different number on it.
The other thing, then go over to the Voronoi scale and increase that so that it's probably about 60 or 70 or so. It's kind of odd, but increasing the scale makes the bumps smaller. So it's a little bit counterintuitive there. The other thing I'd like you to do is change the Euclidean setting above that in the Voronoi where it says Euclidean. Change that to, let's change it to Minkowski. Yeah, that's good. So if you change the Euclidean to Minkowski in the distance metric setting in the Voronoi texture, then it looks a bit more like kind of a seat cushion or something like that. So it kind of looks like a fabric. You can do things like increase the detail if you want or whatever, and there's also like a roughness setting and stuff like that. You can play around with those if you want to whatever floats your boat.
Okay.
But don't
So you can
change
see
it too much for now while you're just learning. All right. So now if we render this, now you'll notice it has like a nice texture to it. But maybe, I don't know, it might be a little bit too deep of a texture or something. So you might turn the strength down if you want to make it a bit more subtle. You don't want it to be too obvious, just subtle, so it looks nicer. Okay, so maybe like the strength should be 0.055 or something like that. All right. The other thing you can do if you want to give a precise value for a setting is you can just click once in that setting box, and it'll basically highlight the value, and then you can type in what you want. So like if you wanted to click on the strength setting and just like single click it and then type in 0.055, you can go exactly to what you want. Now let's go back to the setting for the floor and change it to be kind of grayish or something like that. Go back to the 3D viewport and click on the cube, or in the outliner you can just click on the word cube for the cube object. And now go back to the material button in the properties window, that circle with the checkerboard on it, and where it takes it back to surface, and go ahead and change that base color for this object back to put the hue back closer to the center, and maybe reduce the value so it's a bit more of a gray. Okay, one thing you'll notice here is that this object has a different material than the HPR object. Like if you click on one object, you'll see that a different material has been assigned. This is something that Blender lets you do. Is if you want to assign different materials to different objects, you can duplicate them and take one that you've already done and assign it to a new object and stuff like that. If you click on that little drop down menu that's right next to material, where it says material like in the text input box, and you'll see that it gives you a list of your different materials. You could actually select HPR if you wanted to for the cube, and now you have like the color ramp going across the cube as well. But we don't want that, so make sure the material is set back to material, and we can change the name of that material by clicking in that text input box and just changing it to, let's call it floor. And so that's the floor material. All right. So to get a sense of, let's zoom out a bit so we can see the entire 3D viewport. And we're going to want to change where the camera is let's make this a lot more dramatic. We're also going to change where the light is. So first of all, click on the camera, and then on your number pad, you can press, and I'll tell you what to do if you don't have a number pad in a second. So on your number pad, if you press the 0, it's going to take you into camera view so you can actually see what the view is from the camera. And you'll notice that your viewport now shows like a rectangular box, and that's basically what is inside of the render area. And if you don't have a numpad, then what you can do is in the menu for the viewport where it says view, select, add an object, click on view and go down to where it says cameras in the menu, and then click on active camera, and you'll notice that's where the hotkey is for numpad 0. So click on active camera, and it'll actually take you into the camera view.
Hold on.
And so Blender has this nice feature where you can add an object pad in a second. So on your number pad, if you press the 0, it's going to take you and notice that your viewport now shows like a rectangular box, and that's basically what is inside of the render area. And if you don't have a numpad, then what you can do is in the menu for the viewport where it says view, select, add an object, click on view and go down to where it says cameras in the menu, and then click on active camera, and you'll notice that's where the hotkey is for numpad 0. So click on active camera, and it'll actually take you into the camera view. And so Blender has this nice feature where you can fly your camera using tilde. So if you press shift and then the tilde, which is the upper left-hand key on your keyboard, on most keyboards at least.
Okay. Hold on.
Then it puts
I was okay.
in the menu, and then click on active camera, and you'll notice that's where the hotkey is for numpad 0.
Okay.
So click on active camera, and it'll actually take you into the camera view.
So how do I?
And so Blender has this nice feature where you can fly your camera using tilde. So if you press shift and then the tilde, which is the upper left-hand key on your keyboard, on most keyboards at least, then it puts you into like a game mode view changer.
Okay.
And now if you move your mouse around, you'll see that it kind of changes what your view is. And this is very similar to like a first-person shooter now, where you can use the keys WASD to actually move forward and move left and right and stuff like that. So to move forward, you press W, and it's kind of going into your scene.
On. Something's not.
If you want to put the camera so it's actually in front of the HPR logo and facing it,
something's not
then
right.
you basically look down and to the left of the logo, and then
something's not right, because the way his functions, mine does not quite function like that. I have to figure out what's going on. Okay. So I think I found what we're looking for. Maybe with the keyboard shortcuts that he's using, certain things automatically happen for him. I'm not entirely sure. But according to the documentation, I ended up coming over here to fly walk navigation. Thank goodness for the documentation. Otherwise, this would have been frustrating. But the documentation is excellent. So that, oh man, it's excellent. So we get on over here to, goodness me, where is it? Oh, the view, navigation, and then you got fly walk. So this is what I did. I clicked on fly, which you can see now the camera is doing stuff. So what we can do is, like he said, use the WAS, W. We're going to hit W, which is going to start moving us forward. And we're just going to move a little bit this direction and then reposition. Whoop. See, it's still moving. So you got to kind of play with it, get used to it. All right, that's about enough. I'm going to hit S just to kind of slow it down. And can I go to the, oh, whoa. Too much. That works. Yeah, it does. Oh. All right, I'm trying. This is about as good as I'm going to get. So there you go. There's that. Okay, let's continue with the tutorial.
Your mouse around, you'll see that it kind of changes what your view is. And this is very similar to like a first-person shooter now, where you can use the keys WASD to actually move forward and move left and right and stuff like that. So to move forward, you press W, and it's kind of going into your scene. If you want to put the camera so it's actually in front of the HPR logo and facing it, then you basically look down and to the left of the logo, and then go into the scene by pressing W, and then moving over and seeing where you're at. You know, is it right? And once you get close enough, you can start to strafe left and right by using the A and D keys to basically move to the left a bit. And then you can use the Q and E keys to move up and down. And so this lets you set up the camera in a nice way so that you can just move through your scene, and you don't have to like fiddle with how is the camera pointing and what's the angle and stuff like that. You can just use these nice, view keys. So once you get set up, so that basically I want you to set up so that the HPR logo is right in front of you, like it's it's parallel to the view plane, and you can see it. So once you have that set up and it's kind of filling up your screen a bit, click the left mouse button to accept the view change, And again, if you don't like what you see and you want to change it again, you just press Shift tilde and you move your camera around.
Oh, see, Shift
right.
tilde.
So
he didn't say
if
that
we press
the first
F12
time.
at this point, now
I'm
we
sure
have,
he didn't say
the
Shift
HPR
tilde.
logo right in front of us, and it's looking, very, very dominant in the scene. Go ahead and close the render window, and we're going to make this a lot more dramatic. On the light object, basically in the outliner where it says light, and then press G to start moving it. Move it down, and then use your middle mouse button to move your viewport so you can actually see.
Hold on. I know we got to get the light going. Let me just back up just a touch here.
On the light object, basically in the outliner where it says light, and then press G to start moving it. Move it down, and then use your middle mouse button to move your viewport so you can actually see. You can rotate around the HPR logo and see around it, and get to the point where you can actually have the light in the left-hand part of the viewport and the camera's over there. And so press G to start moving the light, and move the light so that it's actually behind the HPR logo on the back side of it.
Okay.
If you render this now, you'll see that, we have HPR, behind, with the light shining from behind. You see the shadows coming at us rather dramatically. And that's kind of cool and stuff, but it still looks kind of cheesy and generic and stuff. It's not quite ready to go. The other thing you'll notice is that the HPR letters aren't actually touching the floor. So we're going to fix that right now. If you can go back to your camera view, and then from your camera view, click on the HPR logo and press G and then Z to make it so that it goes up and down. And just move your, just kind of eyeball it, move the HPR logo until it just goes through the floor, and then bring it back up so that it is just resting on it. From your camera view, click on the HPR logo and press G and then Z to make it so that it goes up and down. And just move your, just kind of eyeball it, move the HPR logo until it just goes through the floor, and then bring it back up so that it is just resting on it. And so now we can press F12 and we'll see it's actually resting on the floor properly.
Camera view.
Close the render window.
Should
now
we be on rendering or something?
We're going to add some fog effects to make it, look a bit more dramatic and a bit more professional.
Something's not
because we're now going.
Okay, something's not quite. Okay, whew. I've been toying around with it and trying to get it to work. I think there was some errors or something happening on my end, but you can still do it from this way right here. What we did, let me just pop back over here real quick. Let me start from the top, from the Z-axis. First, I adjusted my light a little bit more. We went ahead and hit tilde, jumped into the camera view. Then we selected text so we can have it highlighted, and then you hit G, which was and move your mouse up or down, as you can see there, just like we did before, and that puts it on there. But I mean, it still kind of has a. Let me just hit F12 here. It still appears to be kind of floaty, So maybe my floor is too low. I'm not entirely sure. Maybe. I don't know, but there you go. That's what I did. Let's get it going again.
That right now. If you can go back to your camera view, and then from your camera view, click on the HPR logo and press G and then Z to make it so that it goes up and down. And just move your, just kind of eyeball it, move the HPR logo until it just goes through the floor, and then bring it back up so that it is just resting on it. And so now we can press F12 and we'll see it's actually resting on the floor properly. Close the render window. Now we're going to add some fog effects to make it, look a bit more dramatic and a bit more professional. But because we're we're now going to do some more advanced kind of volumetrics and stuff, I want to switch over to a different render engine that Blender offers. So Blender has two basic render engines that are included in it. One is called Eevee, I guess named after the Pokemon character. And then the other one, which is older but more accurate, is called Cycles. You use Eevee when you want quick renders and you don't care about more advanced features like transparency and you don't need reflections and fog effects to be as accurate. But you use Cycles when you do want to be more physically accurate, but it takes longer to actually render. So in order to make that change, you go over to, and actually maybe the first thing we should do before this, and maybe I should have told you this earlier, is let's save the scene. So to do that, go up to File, and up in the upper left-hand corner, go up to File and down to Save. And it'll bring up a window where you can actually save your scene, and let's just call it like HPR logo. And then say Save Blender File. Okay. So now you can press Control S if you want to save your scene throughout the tutorial. Okay. So over on the right-hand side of the screen, back in the Properties area where that has all those icons that are colored different colors, click on the camera icon where it says Render, and where it says Render Engine, click on the Render Engine where it says Eevee and change it to Cycles. And under Cycles, you should now see a couple more settings pop down. If you have a GPU that, like, an NVIDIA or ATI GPU that can do 3D rendering and stuff like that, then try changing the device from CPU to GPU compute. And this may or may not work. If it doesn't work, you might need to look up how to set this up on your own computer. But for now, just use what you can. But GPU compute will make it so that the scene gets rendered a lot faster. Under render settings, Blender sets the settings pretty high by default. So we're going to actually turn those settings down.
Is that actually
so
working?
That it doesn't take as long to render. So under where it says sampling and then viewport, and it says noise threshold and max samples and stuff like that, change the max samples under the viewport section to be 10. So by default it's 1024, which is pretty high. Let's just set that to 10. And that's basically when we go over to rendered view, it's only going to render 10 samples to just give us a rough idea. Then under the render settings, where it says max samples and it says 4096, hey, a power of 2, right? Click on that and change that to, let's say, 256. Because you'll notice that there's a check mark next to denoise. One feature that Blender has added in recent years is the ability to do advanced denoising algorithms that are available in modern CPUs and stuff like that. And so it uses that to be able to reduce noise. And so as a result, you don't have to render as many samples and you can get much faster renders. Okay, maybe Control S for saving. Okay, so now if we, to show you what I mean, if you press F12, you'll notice the window will come up and it'll start rendering, but it will be very fuzzy at first, and it'll start resolving the scene as it goes.
Oh, no.
And
goodness me.
Up in the upper part of the window, it'll say samples, and it'll say some number of 256, and then it'll kind of hang out there for a second, and when it does the final denoising, you'll see a lot of the fuzziness goes away, and now you have like a nice looking scene.
I don't want to put that back.
But you'll notice that the effect of the render is much nicer. It has, it kind of reflects the colors and stuff like that from the logo. And those are things that you get from the Cycles engine, in addition to a whole lot more. Okay, go ahead and close this render window. And now we're going to add some fog to the scene. And so what I want you to do in the viewport window,
What?
press Control A and
Hold on.
go down to Mesh and then add a cube. And we're going to scale this pretty big. So
Viewpoint.
the cube should be selected by default. You can press S for scale and then scale it up so it covers up pretty much your whole scene. Like you're going to say, well, I can't see anything now.
Hold on.
Close this render window. And now we're going to add some fog to the scene. And so what I want you to do in the viewport window, press Control A and
Shift
go
A.
down to Mesh and then add a cube. And we're going to scale this pretty big. So the cube should be selected by default. You can press S for scale and then scale it up so it covers up pretty much your whole scene. Like you're going to say, well, I can't see anything now. But this is basically going to be the fog, and it has to go through the whole scene. Okay, so once it's covering up most things, you click on it to accept it. And now go over to the outliner where it says probably cube.001 and double click on that to rename this to fog. So you've changed your object name from cube001 to fog. Okay. Now we want to make it so that you can't see that in the viewport, so it's not like covering everything up. So if you go down to the properties menu and then click on the icon that's like an orange box with some lines in the corner where it says object, like there's an orange icon in the middle of the icon list, and it says object when you highlight over it. It's right above the wrench. This will change to the transform, relations, collections. Look for the section that's called viewport display and click on that. And this will drop down a bunch of things that will show up in the viewport. And you'll see a setting that says display as textured. Change textured, like click on that box and change textured to bounds. And so basically this only now you can see the HPR logo again, and you're basically only seeing the bounds of the cube that's the fog object. Okay. Now click on the material button for that fog object, that circle with the checker thing, and now create a new material. And by default, it's going to add this principled BSDF, and you'll see the nodes for it, but over in the properties window over on the right hand side, you'll also see this surface preview, and for surface it says principled BSDF. Click on that principled BSDF and change that to principled volume. So like a whole bunch of options will come down when you see principled BSDF. Change it to principled volume. And when you do that, you'll notice that in the shader editor window with all the nodes, that the node for principled BSDF has changed to principled volume, but the volume output is still hooked up to the surface input of the material output. And so you basically need to change this so the volume output goes to the volume input. So what you do is you can either click on the volume output and just drag a new line,
Whoa.
or you can start by clicking on the right end of the node line and just move it down to volume. So again, click on the principled volume output, and then drag a line down to volume on the material output. The density of the principled volume is set to 1 by default, and that's too high. So let's change this to say 0.2, and then change the anisotropy a few settings down from density. That's set to 0. Let's change this to 0.6. Okay. You don't see anything yet, but if you go up to the upper right-hand corner of the viewport window where you set like the render mode of the viewport, if you change that to the one all the way to the right where it says viewport shading, you can change this to rendered. Then you'll suddenly see a dramatic change, and you'll start seeing kind of a rendered output of things. And so now this is starting to come together, right? All right. So now let's move the light so that it's kind of behind the P in HPR. So you should be looking at the HPR logo through the camera view. What I want you to do is, instead of trying to click on the light in the rendered scene, you'll click on light in the outliner in the upper right-hand corner.
All right, hold on.
Light, and now you have the light selected. First thing I want you to do...
Something's not quite right. Okay. I think we got it. Down here on emission strength, I changed that to 0.1. I forget where it was before. But if you're having issues like I am, change emission strength, and the fog won't be so thick that it's just, obscuring everything. So that's what we had before. And I just dragged this down to 0.1. There you go. Hopefully that, because we did density, and I'm not even going to try that. But yeah, there you go. That's what I did. Hopefully hopefully you get some better results as well. And now we're going to go continue on with the tutorial.
Viewport shading, you can change this to rendered. Then you'll suddenly see a dramatic change, and you'll start seeing kind of a rendered output of things. And so now this is starting to come together, right? All right. So now let's move the light so that it's kind of behind the P in HPR. So you should be looking at the HPR logo through the camera view. What I want you to do is, instead of trying to click on the light in the rendered scene, you'll click on light in the outliner in the upper right-hand corner. So where it says light.
Oh, this is terrible.
And now you have the light selected. First thing I want you to do is press G in the 3D viewport, and then start moving the light down until you get until you get the light kind of right behind the hole in the P. There you go. And then click on the left mouse button to accept the movement. And now we're going to increase the intensity of this light by increasing the power. So if you look over in the properties window, you should see like preview light, and it has like point, sun, spot, area. This is over on the right hand side. First of all, let's change this to be an area light, and basically this makes it so that instead of being a single point of light, it's like actually more like a light bulb, where it's like the light is kind of diffused a bit more.
Mm-hmm.
And let's change that power setting to be, let's say, 2,000 watts. So you can just click on that and change it to a 2, or change it to 2,000. And then let's change the color of the light a bit by clicking on the color.
Oh my God.
And in the chooser, moving it over to be a bit more yellowish, All right. So now we're starting to see some really cool effects, huh? All right. Now if you click on, if you press F12, you'll see, a much more dramatic scene being rendered. And I think at this point, and you'll see kind of like, God's rays coming off of the H's and stuff like that. You can go farther with this, much farther, of course, but we're going to leave it at this and let the scene render out until it gets to 256, and then does the, the denoising option. If you want to, you can change your render samples to be higher and try to get a higher quality scene. But I think for now this is good enough, and you can see the potential of what you can do. In the render window, if you click on image in the menu and then go down to save, you can save this output of your render. And so this will bring up a window for saving the output. The first thing I want you to do is go over to file format and change this to JPEG, because PNG images are pretty big by default, and you'll end up taking up a lot of space. And I'd like to be able to see what you end up doing, with your render. And so maybe you can post to Twitter or Mastodon replying back to the HPR post for this episode, and just share your rendering and maybe put hashtag and HPR and also hashtag Blender.
I don't know where
to
say
kind
it
of
is.
draw attention from the Blender community to what's going on. Post Twitter or Mastodon, go down to save and try to get a higher quality scene. But I think for now this is good enough, and you can see the potential of what you can do. In the render window, if you click on image in the menu and then go down to save, you can save this output of your render. And so this will bring up a window for saving the output. The first thing I want you to do is go over to file format and change this to JPEG, because PNG images are pretty big by default, and you'll end up taking up a lot of space. And I'd like to be able to see what you end up doing, with your render. And so maybe you can post to Twitter or Mastodon, replying back to the HPR post for this episode, and just share your rendering and maybe put hashtag and HPR and also hashtag Blender, to kind of draw attention from the Blender community to what's going on.
That is insane.
Just name this file like hpr.jpg and say save.
Look at that render.
And now you can post your own image to social media, and I'd love to see it. Okay, so there's a whole bunch more stuff we can do with Blender. I'd love to hear from you if this was a useful episode, if it was helpful in getting you to learn Blender better, and how you like this format of just an audio tutorial for a visual program, how you think it works. Okay, take care, and remember to try to post your own HPR episodes, because they need more. Take care. Bye.
All right. That was fun. That was super fun. What I want to do, though, I think in mine, that light may be a little bit too bright. Yeah, it's a bit bright. Let's not go 2000 watts, shall we? Let's do about 600, and I like a cool light, so yellow is not really me. Let's go to more cool light. Good enough for me, right? That'll get her somewhat done there. Oh boy. Hold on. I said 600, not 6,000. There we go. Can we dim that a bit? And did he switch to a different light? He said switch this to a different one. Let's just click stuff and see what happens. Okay, that may not be anywhere near what we want. And is this also drawing on the CPU right here? Oh, it is. Goodness. Okay, so yeah, when you do render, it gives you the business. What about spot? What does that do? Ooh, I kind of like that. Spotlight? That might be what we want, right? Area? Oh, I found it. So I raised the light up a little bit. Shift T would have actually given you that. Okay, so let's try it. Shift T. Oh, yeah, there it is. Okay, so I raised the light up a little bit and the controls were there. And let's see what sort of monstrosity. Oh, goodness. Let's see what we got here. You know what? Oh, goodness me. That render is just... I don't know. I really wish I could figure out what happened with the colors. I'm going to play around with it a bit more, try to get the colors to do independent, how he described it. But yeah, we'll figure it out. All right, so I think I found out what it was. Over here on gradient texture, you have to change gradient texture to linear. I forgot what it was on by default, but when you switch that to linear, it helps. And now what I'm doing is I'm just trying to get each color to be what it's supposed to be there. It's looking pretty good because the P and the B, the P and the R touch each other right there. It's gonna be a little spill there, I suppose. I'm gonna try and make, okay, that's about as good as I can get it right there. All right, so by playing around with it, we got it. And we got a spotlight on there as well, so that when I hit render, that sucker is going to render up some. I won't mind to be dimmer though. I don't know. I'm gonna play with the light some more. All right. I'm not sure how this recording is going to turn out with Blender's rendering turning my CPU into a space heater. But what happened is after the render, I had to render this thing a couple of times because I didn't know that on combine, it just shows a black image at the end. And I was trying to figure out like, why does it go from a beautiful thing to a pitch black image like this? But you have to select this, I guess, to see what you're supposed to be seeing. Yeah. Still a little bit to learn about this, but I'm happy with the results nonetheless. And I guess you can sharpen it up a little bit more if you add more layers to it or whatever. So, yeah. This is what I'm going to be posting on HPR, and I'll upload this video soon. I'll cut it down a little bit, and I hope you guys enjoyed.